The Renaissance, it was a period of European civilization, immediately following the Middle Ages. It was a surge in the interest in the classical scholarship and its values. It was the revival of classical learning and wisdom after periods of cultural decline that would forever change the world of the arts, politics, religion, and even economics. It was the thrust into the modern age.
So today I am in Florence. I'm actually in my campus, and we're going to be talking about the Renaissance. Was it even a thing? So to be able to consider whether or not the Renaissance is a thing, first we're going to have to think that it was. So generally it starts in the 14th century and it ends in the 17th century. It's seen as a gap between the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages, and this new age, this age of thought that is seen in artists, sculptors, in philosophers, in architects. It is seen as a new age of enlightenment that will thrust the world into the modern day of today. So to first understand the Renaissance, we have to understand the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. The term was first coined by the historian Petrarch, that he saw his own time as dark, as everybody was living under the influence of the church. They were essentially sheep, ignorant sheep, sheep that were struggling to survive. So they were essentially in the dark instead of stepping into the light and appreciating the world of the arts. The arts. Okay, so essentially there was a rebirth of studying the antiquities, ancient Greece and Rome. As scholars started to research more about the ancients, the old philosophers, they started to develop an idea that would be known as the humanities, humanism, the idea that the world revolved around man, that man was the center of the universe. And so his achievements, his education, his literary practices, those should be celebrated. This is also where we get the idea of the humanities, which is what I study, and it's also the reason why I'm paying thousands and thousands of dollars to go to school, probably just to be broke, unless I get myself a patron.
So patronage is something I've talked a lot about in my recent videos because I think it is a fascinating subject. The most famous patrons were the Medici, and so essentially it is a really, really rich person who's willing to finance the endeavors of a sculptor, an artist, an architect, and, you know, support a whole new cultural movement.
Okay, you can come closer. Because we've got the perfect example of the ideal of man during the Renaissance. We've got a very scholarly learner, a guy holding some books, and holding even more books on his feet. And he's ready to rule the world. He's ready to rule the world with his knowledge. I should hold my book.
So humanism, Studia Humanitatis, refers to the studies that, rather than concentrating on religious matters, focusing instead on what it is to be human, by looking at philosophies of the ancients, to consider what is a virtuous individual in the wisest sense, and how that individual may fully participate in public life.
And so that's essentially what humanism was. It was the focus on humans as individuals and celebrating their achievements. So that's why it was seen kind of as, it's a removal of this sort of religious ideal of everything is for the word of God. It's a much more secularized approach. And that is why the Renaissance is kind of termed as the first time, the first step into modernity. So the birth of humanism happens kind of as there's a loss of credibility in the church. The church was being plagued with rumors of incest, corruption, murder, and so people were losing faith in what should have been the holy institution. But this didn't mean that people weren't religious. People in the Renaissance were extremely religious. There was no automatic break, no automatic rupture from the Catholic Church. So this is the biggest problem with the Renaissance. There is no timeline, no time frame. Nobody really knows when the Renaissance started or when it ended. It could have started in the late 1300s and the early 1400s, and it could have ended anywhere between the discovery of the Americas, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, we have the Age of Discovery, or it could have happened way later in the 17th century, and that's about 200 years difference. So the Renaissance is more of a concept than an actual time frame. Sir, do you know when the Renaissance ended? You're funny. Good sir, do you know when the Renaissance ended? Oh, she's a missus. Miss, do you know when the Renaissance ended? Hey, you definitely don't know when the Renaissance ended because he's a Greek thing. Miss, do you know when the Renaissance ended? Does anybody? And so this brings us to a very, very important point. The concept of the Renaissance, yeah, it didn't happen for everybody. It happened for the very, very rich and their select group of friends and their favorite artist. And so most people, they just didn't have the luxury. They didn't have the luxury to learn, to spend hours and hours of day analyzing philosophers. They had to work. They were forced to gather every single penny they could to survive. So the Renaissance was truly a concept that only happened for the very, very rich. And so this brings us to our actual very last point. The Renaissance is kind of seen as this rediscovery of the ancient Greeks and Romans. But that would be considering the fact that the ancient Greeks and the Romans had been at some point lost to history, which this never really happened because they were studied in depth by the surrounding Muslim world. They were translated, they were analyzed, and so this supposed rediscovery is more of just new information going to Europe. And so, not saying that the Renaissance isn't cool, it is actually my favorite time in history, if we considered that it actually did happen. Okay, thank you so much. I hope you liked this video. If you do, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and move on to your next video, which just hopefully happens to be one of mine. Goodbye!